Anatomy by Kitty Horror Show is one of the most intensely frightening gaming experiences I have ever had. Its terror is not found in stalking monsters or jump scares, but rather in the fact that it seems to know you, your very structure, how to crawl through the cracks in your windows and under the torn wallpaper of your flesh. Anatomy's horror is born from a question it slowly unfurls throughout its acts. It's a question that lingers, invasive and inescapable, and yet so deeply embedded for some that it already resides within their very blood. The abject horror of Anatomy is how this question, once stirred within a player's thoughts, resists removal. It settles into the architecture of the mind and stays there, thrumming with an invisible urgency, with a desperate hunger to be addressed. The question is this: what happens when the body you inhabit begins to consume you? Anatomy's central question is not literal. This is a game about structure, where the boundaries between an organic body of flesh, blood, sinew, and teeth collapse into an eerily stagnant domesticity. Its contained space of exploration, a barren home, is as much a body as it is a house. Its structure, its bones, glitching and fracturing between lifeless mundanity, states of mental and physical pain, and moments of ferocious hostility. Through its intense, destabilizing atmosphere and spoken word, the game explores how a human might collapse under the weight of their own rotten beams, infested with parasites, detached from a world that simply passes by their shade-drawn windows on a quiet street. Equally, it postulates how a house might grow hungry, where its teeth reside, and what tempts it to close its gaping maw around its own inhabitants. Through the striking parallel between bodily and architectural inhabitation it builds on, Anatomy suggests that both can become sites of entrapment, deterioration, and eventual consumption. Anatomy can be dissected into 4 distinct parts. 3 of those parts take place inside the slowly deteriorating house, and the 4th part is an ending sequence that seems to have at least 5 possible variations. Every run begins the same way, with the distinctive sound of a VHS tape entering into a player, and a screen which introduces the sequence with the game's title and a date, the 18th of August, 1994. From here we are placed into a hallway so dark that you would be forgiven for not noticing the faintest sign of a wall ahead of you. The most overt indication that the game has even begun comes from the destabilizing visual and audio elements themselves. Fuzzy tracking lines crawling down the screen, and a quiet yet persistent drone that whirs on and on. The atmosphere is immediately unstable and degraded, as if entering into something fragile, already on the cusp of breaking down. The VHS effect immediately brought a sense of deep unease to me, someone who grew up in the 90s and noughties and clung to my various tapes as if the stories wound around their insides were as precious as life itself. The telltale signs of a misaligned or damaged VHS struck a particular fear into my heart that was reanimated here as the lines of noise persistently obscured my view. This familiar distortion evokes a strange nostalgia, one imbued with a specific kind of dread. The sense that something that should be intact, that should contain a precious sense of safety and comfort, is slipping out of reach. Though we appear to be somehow playing a tape, the immediacy of the world makes it feel very personal and near. The game not only collapses the boundary between house and body, but also between observer and participant. We are not viewing the tape or passively watching a memory, but rather existing within it, inhabiting it. From this, a dual sensation arises, one of deep intrusion, as though we are a foreign object invading the insides of an organism, and one of recognition, as though we have been here before, and that in fact, there is no other place for us to be. After all, the only doors that cannot be opened in the first 3 acts are the entrance and exit. At first, all rooms in the house are locked, the only traversable spaces being those without doors, the hallways, the living room, and the kitchen, the latter of which contains a tape player upon a table. Each space is so dark and barren that simply coming across an innocuous object elicits a sense of fright. I found myself hugging the walls as if a child desperately seeking the skin of their mother, but found only cold walls decorated by strange and unsettling images, devoid of the warmth of skin. I began to realize that despite the hanging frames, the house feels unloved, unlived in. Bookcases are empty, furniture is bare and sparsely placed, shelves are free from the usual clutter and signs of life you would expect to see in a home. Even the images on the walls feel cold and detached, scientific photographs of insects, anatomical diagrams of organs, etchings of other imposing buildings staring down at you. I found myself unable to dare an ascent up the dark staircase at first, the memory of my own mother's comment about my running on the stairs like the devil was hot on my heels suddenly igniting in my mind. From these initial impressions alone, anatomy does something deeply affecting. If you have doors and windows cracked or unlocked by familial pain, anatomy knows how to open them. As much as we have entered the game, anatomy might just know how to enter you back. Placing the first tape inside the player, a voice begins to speak.
In the psychology of the modern civilized human being, it is difficult to overstate the significance of the house. Since as early as the Neolithic era, humankind has defined itself by its buildings, buildings for worship, buildings for socializing, buildings for protection, even buildings for the commemoration of the dead. But of all the structures that mankind has invented for itself, there is little doubt that the house is that which it relies upon most completely for its continued survival.
Thus begins the core mechanic of anatomy's progression. We listen to the voice on the tape player, after which a clue about where the following tape can be found appears visually on the screen. The rooms unlock sequentially, only becoming accessible once a tape is to be found within it. The tapes, in an authoritative academic voice, explicitly suggests what has already been felt, the comparative nature of a house and a body.
Why do human beings of our modern age foster this tremendous sympathy toward their homes? There are many reasons, of course, but perhaps it is due in some small part to seeing them as a reflection of ourselves.
The tapes slice apart the anatomy of a house, separating its rooms into comparable human counterparts. The living room as the heart.
The living room is very much the heart of the house. While a human heart circulates blood to oxygenate the body's extremities, the living room circulates people, activity, communication. It is the room most likely to be found beating, as active and vivacious as its name would imply.
The hallways as the veins, the staircase as the spine, the windows as the eyes.
The windows of a house serve much the same purpose as eyes, and anyone who has ever rounded a bend or long drive and come suddenly face to face with a tall, dark manor will tell you that it is difficult to shake the impression that the house, through its lightless windows, is a creature capable of vision and intelligence.
And even the bedroom as the mind, a poetic interpretation of the thinking, dreaming part of it.
In the bedroom, dreams are dreamt, passions are ignited, epiphanies are experienced in cold sweat at early hours. In the bedroom is where people invariably spend the majority of their time, though comparatively little of it whilst conscious.
The voice suggests that the kitchen and dining room acting as the stomach or digestive system is a tenuous comparison, not offering an alternative space for digestion in their stead. This will become important later. As the voice carries us through a guided dissection of the house, we traverse its hallway veins and penetrate the rooms they speak of, one by one, collecting the next portion of their deconstruction. Though clinical and distant, I found myself comforted by this anonymous voice. Discovering a new tape and quickly scuttling back down to the player again became a ritual that bore a new feeling. Safety. The pattern recognition within their words, likening the ridged pathway of a staircase to the spine, or the twist of whimsy found in the likening of a bedroom to a dreamy mind, felt familiar and satiated my hunger for imaginative escapism. The constant, unrelenting dread that the atmosphere of the house creates is so oppressive that the slightest shred of something human, something capable of thought and imagination through which we might even have a moment of respite, becomes the sole beacon of hope that we have to cling to. Even as the voice begins to analyse the function of a basement, the unease such a space evokes is recognised and therefore does not feel like a solitary endeavour. The basement as the unconscious mind.
The basement is dark. It is buried. It is a place full of cobwebs where memories are stored. A poignant comparison, truly. Often the unnerving uncertainty that comes with considering the deeper aspects of the human psyche is not unlike gazing down at the swimming blackness pooled at the bottom of a basement stairwell. It is a place we spend our childhoods filling with monsters that will lay for years in patient silence. It is a place that, barring some specific errand, we seldom ever want to go.
There is a sinking feeling that comes at the realization that the basement will be the next location to discover a tape. But that recognition alone, that it is a space of unknown shadow, of fear, a space we would not be inspired to descend into, builds on that sense of solidarity with others, with that voice. I am not alone in this feeling. The vast darkness of the basement is illuminated ever so slightly by the penultimate tape of the first act. After emerging, one cannot help but have the thought, that must have been the scariest of the rooms. There is a certain feeling of relief to have it out of the way. However, the basement tape itself claws at a crack in any self-assurance or relief its securing may have garnered.
Of course, this comparison, though appropriate, is a very heavy-handed one, and often the basement is little more than a storage space littered with the corpses of spiders and woodlice. While poets and psychoanalysts no doubt dread the thought of a dark basement, in truth, it is the bedroom, the waking mind, that place of dreams, that is actually the most frightening of all.
Ascending the stairs, you must open the door into the master bedroom. The walls are blood red, the room thick with a strange hostility. Quite suddenly, the comfort of the thought when faced with the basement, "I'm not alone," turns to terror. I am not alone. If we have been made to feel as both intruder and inhabitant in this house, then this room is one where neither are welcome. The tape is found on the bed. It feels intimate to take something from a bed that is not yours, to be curious about its contents. As the final tape of this act is secured, the room shifts for the first time. The door is gone. Images of various dental photographs and diagrams appear on the walls. X-rays with door-like spaces carved through clenched teeth, the sharp prongs lining the mouth of a predator. Grotesque medical images that transform the mouth into something inhuman and raw. The hostility this room held feels absolute and quite literally inescapable in this moment. And as a tape player has appeared on the wall alongside the graphic imagery inciting thoughts of being savaged, there is nothing left to do but to listen to the final tape.
It is here, in the bedroom, that we are at our most vulnerable. Each night we shut our senses to the world for hours at a time, trusting in the house to keep us safe until next we wake. In this state of extreme vulnerability, we will spend something like 20% of our lives. Anything might stand beside us, watch us, keep us company until dawn, and we would never perceive it. We can only pray that the house will not let such things carry on as we sleep. In this way, during these hours, the bedroom seems less like a mind and more like a mouth. For it is here that the house is most likely to betray us. It is here that we place ourselves most at the house's mercy and spend each night hoping that it will not bite down.
The game crashes, marking the end of the first act. A player must choose to start again, to decide that this first foray into terror was not enough. The very device of having the game crash is one that invites a persistence, a desire to understand what we just experienced, and perhaps what we did wrong to be regurgitated out, expelled from the depths of the story. Many doors are left unopened in this first act. Images are not explained. The house has threatened us with hostility, and yet somehow it begs to be known. Restarting the game, things are slightly different. The immediate changes are just minor enough that they could be missed on a first playthrough. I got the sense that the visual static was more intense, that the opening screen wasn't so disturbed before, though the changes were so slight that I questioned myself. But what felt most certain was the sound. The low hum of the first act had been replaced by something harsher, a sound that felt less controlled and therefore even more intrusive. I got the sense that taking a step further into anatomy's insides was allowing it to take a step further into me. Gravitating towards what had become the designated safe space, the kitchen tape player, I placed the tape inside, hoping for the voice that I had come to find a familiar comfort.
In the psychology of the modern civilized human being, it is difficult to overstate the significance of the house. Since as early as the Neolithic era, humankind has defined the era of the dead. But of all the structures that mankind has invented for itself, there is little doubt that the house is that which it relies upon most completely for its continued survival.
The familiar guiding voice has become destabilized. Each tape is now garbled or missing chunks of its body of information. The words that follow on screen now veer between torn, unintelligible distortions of their former instructions or provide entirely new information. The most striking of all being this, that every door is now unlocked. A fact that might invite curiosity or excitement in any other setting, but that here, especially now with the confirmation that this environment is subject to change, a change that feels like collapse, is unimaginably threatening. Throughout the first act, the prevailing feeling I received through the atmosphere of the house was one that leaned more towards lifelessness. The threat of the house did not come from its animation, of which there was almost none, but rather from its emptiness and concealment. The darkness, the locked doors, the sparse decor, the clinical nature of its wall hangings, all fed into this sense that this structure was in a state of decay, not life. The symbolic dissection we enacted through the guidance of the tapes and the systematic entry into the various organs and limbs of the house's body fed into an understanding that we were excavating hidden pieces from something dormant. This is part of what makes the final sequence so chilling. Suddenly the house animates by removing the door to the bedroom, by metaphorically and literally through the wall hangings, baring its teeth before closing itself. It marks a cataclysmic shift when considering our central question, what happens when the body you inhabit begins to consume you? Because if bodies and houses are interchangeable, then a house in a state of animation must be capable of consumption. With freedom now to move between any room I desired, I started to pay close attention to anything that granted me agency, noticing that I was able to now turn the TV in the living room on and off, bringing a small but appreciated feeling of comfort to this space with its calming blue light. In the corner of the same room, a standing lamp has appeared that was not there previously, which can also be turned on or off. I found that the dining room table was now set with plates, the slightest suggestion of life now allowed to be known, though the plates remain empty of sustenance and they can be shattered to pieces, rendering them useless. Beyond the now openable doors and small interactive additions downstairs, my mind also began processing the images that line the walls. The choices already felt decidedly more intentional after having experienced the teeth of the master bedroom, so now I felt compelled to start understanding the language of this house, just as it seemed to understand how to get under my own skin too. On the lower floor, a few of the pictures stood out to me most pressingly. This image of a skeletal cat and dog from William Cheselden's The Anatomy of the Bones was the first to really strike me. Though still an image from a scientific book, the whimsical, artsy aura it has brings forth a concoction of unease and playfulness, and it ended up being one of those images that actually made me feel the most stabilized as it came into view through my near-blind wanderings through the various spaces. Here, bodies stripped literally to the bone are captured in a way that makes them feel not only alive, but with a sense of personality. It seems the lines between what is alive or dead, between human, object, and animal, are blurred through many of these images. In the dining room is this anatomical drawing of a human placenta, a drawing by Adriaan van den Spiegel, found in a book detailing fetal development and the anatomy of the womb. The image shows both the fetal and maternal sides of the placenta, an organ that physically attaches mother and child, one that is expelled and its tether cut upon birth, the first of what may be many stages of separation between parent and child. In the absence of a clear function of a dining room in the earlier tapes, I felt this image communicate something unsaid about this space, something that was further elucidated by the ability to smash those plates. A dining room, and indeed a kitchen, are spaces intended for sustenance, but the sustenance one might receive is not as straightforward as the inevitability of a vein carrying blood to a heart. What gets put into a person's mouth is shaped by what is available to them. Just as many things pass from mother to baby through the umbilical cord, a child is constrained to what they are given by those who came before them. What a parent chooses to give a child may be shaped by many things: a desire to nourish, the beliefs of their own parents, of religion, of comfort, of indulgence. For some, feeding becomes a mechanism for control and even punishment. The dining room becomes a complex space that is not dictated by the body alone, but rather what is funneled into it. The space of agency becomes not what you choose to consume, but rather choosing to consume what you are given or refusing to consume at all. Not everything passes through the placenta and into a developing child, but there are a vast number of things that will, nourishing, neutral, or poisonous. The placenta diagram, seeming so aptly placed in the dining room through this framing, led me to wonder about the picture in the kitchen too. These rooms were the most resistant to clean definition in the tapes, and yet, since the placenta helped me understand the complexity of a dining room, I was compelled to use the open cadaver of the kitchen to further my understanding of these elusive counterparts. The kitchen acts as our hub throughout the game, the place we start and are prepared for each new exploration through the guidance of the tapes. The diagram reframes the kitchen as something more complex than a stomach or any singular part of the digestive system. It establishes the space as a site of preparation, where bodies are opened, their ribs prized apart, vital organs exposed. The purpose of this room is to recontextualize what consumption actually means in this body of a house. That it is not something passive nor comforting, but an invasive procedure of slicing, breaking, pulling apart, and even destruction. The kitchen is where the act of preparation by listening to the tapes and exploration by acting on the words intersect with an explicit and literal dissection of a body that no longer appears dormant. Consumption here is not a natural act of nourishing oneself, but enforced, instructed, and even violent. If the function of its rooms are what give a house a body, if the humans who exist within it give definition, meaning, and life to its various rooms, then to be consumed by a house is not the act of literally being swallowed by a distant, inhuman eldritch monster, but is an architectural manifestation of the lifelong process of being shaped, filled, and defined by what is given to you, along with the utter horror, desperation, loneliness, and self-annihilation that can create. That leads me to the art of the upper floor. Where the lower floor's art depicted life in the inanimate, a dissected cadaver, inanimate yet foreboding buildings, an organ bridging sustenance without bodies to connect, an artificial hand, skeletal animals brought to life, a reconstruction of the first anesthesia. The upper floor's images seem to explore ideas of intrusion, identity, desire, and vulnerability. The upper hallway is lined with photomicrographs created by Arthur E. Smith, essentially photos of insects or insect parts under a microscope. The first is a genus of hoverfly, Ringia, known for their distinctive long snout. I expected this to be some kind of parasite given the feeling of intrusion here, but upon reading about these creatures, I realised that their attributes aligned with my thoughts about the lower floor and the idea of being both part of this structure and unwanted at the same time. Their defining feature, the elongated nose, struck me as a reflection of how bodies and indeed houses are defined and categorized through their physical structures, fixed into identities they have no agency over. You have your mother's nose, and ringia are distinct due to their long snout, feel no different here. Upon reading that the larvae of this species feed on animal waste, I realized another disturbing correlation. The themes of consumption and identity formation are explicitly taken out of nourishment entirely and moved into contamination. Just as the diagram of the placenta suggested, what shapes a body is not always our choice, and what is given may not always be sustaining, and may even be toxic or unwanted. In the context of the rest of the upper floor's imagery and construction, an implication grows even more powerfully, that even things that should be rejected, expelled, or processed can still take root inside us, can still form the ways in which we move through the world, especially so if that is dictated by the genus we belong to, by the family structure we live in. Nearby is this image of a water beetle's foot. Rather than building on the idea of consuming, this focus on a singular part of a structure brings forward ideas of agency and choice, and how the physical structure of our bodies can become a site of struggle rather than something we simply possess. The water beetle is known for its incredible grip, particularly the males of the species who use the suction capabilities of their feet to hold female beetles in place for mating. Notably, females have grooved wings to make attachment more difficult, an evolutionary way to reclaim some agency over reproduction. The sexual dimorphism of water beetles makes the inclusion of this close-up foot feel very intentional. For me, this image encapsulates the gendered expectations and roles that are imposed on bodies from birth, which evolve through family shaping. It also suggests that in general, bodies and therefore houses are not neutral systems that always function the same way, but rather they are sites of ongoing struggle where both control and resistance are part of the structures themselves. Also found in this hallway are these two images, one of an antlion and one of a type of mite. I grouped these two together because when explored in the context of one another, they build a very powerful picture about dynamics within structures. These two creatures present two forms of consumption within a single system. The antlion, known for its use of traps as it waits motionless for its prey to fall into them, is a mirror of the house itself, a seemingly dormant body that funnels movement and traps rather than pursues. One that only animates once it is sure its prey is unable to escape. Conversely, though still known for their methods of consumption, mites represent a more insidious form of it. Unseen not due to their lack of animation, but due to their size, they are microscopic, often going unnoticed as they feed on their host continuously from within. Together, they invite the suggestion that the house itself is not only a singular entity, but a complex layered system that contains multiple forms of consumption, from the covert to the near invisible. This mirrors not only the sorts of dynamics and vastly differing experiences individuals will have within a singular household, but what is literally happening in the game itself as we traverse the structural viscera of this home, feeding on whatever information we can find, opening and interacting with whatever we can in an attempt to survive or even just understand. It also strikes me that while some of these creatures might feed on one another, others feed on waste, as mentioned with the ringgia, whose larva survives primarily on animal dung, or our final insect image, a butterfly's proboscis, which it not only uses for flowers but indeed on decaying animal carcasses, feces, urine, and rotten fruit. Together, no matter the details of their individual behaviors and traits, the imagery of various insects really culminates a powerful idea about bodies, structures, and being part of a genus, that these things are not neutral or even self-contained, but become complicated ecosystems in which things like agency, identity, and even consumption are constantly challenged, negotiated, or controlled by your environment, and even by the structure of the body itself. To exist within such an ecosystem is to be subject to forces outside your control, and the less an individual aligns with the body they are born into, the physical body itself, the body of people that form their family, the body of the house, the more hostile and nightmarish simply inhabiting a space becomes. There is a reason that this house feels both familiar and completely uninhabitable, as if it wants to be known but also to reject, as if we are feeding on its decaying remains, yet it is also alive and on the verge of sinking its teeth into us. The upper floor rooms build even further on themes of identity, shaping, and structural roles. There are 3 bedrooms here, the master bedroom with which we have already been intimately acquainted, and 2 more with single beds. On the first run of the game, the far bedroom with the purple bed was the only one accessible during the explorative dissection. The green bedroom never opened and was left completely unaddressed. During the 3 explorations of the house in its varying states of disruption and decay, you never get to choose which bedroom should represent the dreamy mind. The tape is always found in the far room, even when the green bedroom becomes unlocked from the second run onwards. This struck me as important. Though these rooms are comparatively very similar, something separates them from the start, and it's something that only becomes more apparent as the game progresses. Let's start by looking at the similarities. Both are single bedrooms, so when looking at the home in a more literal way, these would be most likely for the children of the family. But when looking at all rooms as parts of one whole, these 2 spaces become something far more interesting. Both are barren and lacking in the kind of clutter or personal effects one might expect to see in a child's room, save for a single piece of art hanging on the wall and distinct colour choices, purple and green respectively. These subtle differences feel meaningful. The colour choices themselves are quite striking when considering they are complementary colours, colours that create high visual contrast but that cancel each other out when combined. I followed this thread of thought further by considering the red of the master bedroom. Red is a primary colour, an apt choice for the parental part of the house, the origin point from which others are formed. And while purple is made using red, green is not. Green and purple feel strangely more related due to the fact they do have blue in common. However, the visual and emotional contrast between green and red is most overt of all. These are colours that compete and do not share a common colour, which for me created a feeling of tension between them. If the purple and green rooms are meant to be 2 parts of the same whole, then these visual choices plant the seeds of a powerful feeling that this body compartmentalizes parts of itself that feel most oppositional to the master bedroom. If the master bedroom, the parental origin point, dictates the shape and form of the individual, then it seems the green parts of this structure are purposely closed off and unincluded. The green room's diametric opposition to red and purple, its locked state, and its exclusion from the intended sequence of exploration make it feel distinctly other, even when you are granted access. After all, you can complete anatomy without ever stepping foot inside this room, and it does not hinder you nor change any of the events. Even the art is very similar on first glance, but there once again are some vital differences that separate them further. It strikes me that both images seem to depict little girls sleeping. In the purple room, the image on the wall is a Victorian-era spectral photograph called Dreaming of Santa Claus. In the photograph, what appears to be two little girls are sleeping peacefully in bed, while the photographer has used double exposure to create a ghostly image over the top, giving it a dreamlike quality. In the green bedroom, the image of choice is also a slumbering little girl, an etching titled Dreamland, which, similar to the spectral photograph, depicts her dreams entering reality, in this case represented by her dolls coming to life beside her. Again, the lines between object, animal, and human are purposely blurred. In Dreaming of Santa Claus, though there is some manner of physical manifestation representing the dream, it does not feel so tangible or intrusive. The ghostly form above the bed is not an opaque, solid object that would seem capable of interfering with the real world of the sleeping children. The image creates a feeling that our subconscious thoughts, our desires, fears, and dreams exist in another plane of reality, one that does not physically interact with the structures of our world. There is a sense that if these little girls were to open their eyes, the foggy dream would simply dissipate like a torn cloud. In the Dreamland image, however, there is nothing to separate the animated dolls from the inanimate one in the little girl's arms, nor indeed anything to separate them from the girl herself. The dolls are solid, tangible, active beings, drawn towards the slumbering girl who is left as defenseless and unmoving as a doll herself. It really reminds me of the final tape of the first act. It is here, in the bedroom, that we are at our most vulnerable. Each night, we shut our senses to the world for hours at a time, trusting in the house to keep us safe until next we wake. Anything might stand beside us, watch us, keep us company until dawn, and we would never perceive it. We can only pray that the house will not let such things carry on while we sleep. In this way, during these hours, the bedroom seems less like a mind and more like a mouth, for it is here that the house is most likely to betray us. It is here that we place ourselves most at the house's mercy and spend each night hoping that it will not bite down. Though the dolls do not appear hostile, the image is certainly unsettling in this setting, and even more so when paired with the most obvious difference between these two rooms. As mentioned, the purple room always holds the tape found after the bedroom as the mind tape. The green room, however, has a player that has a tape preloaded, a tape that cannot be removed and cannot be replaced by any other. During this second act, where all doors unlock, we have the option to listen to this player, and its contents only add to the strange and unsettling feeling this room contains. This prayer and the mention of praying in the previous master bedroom tape brings the ideas of spirituality and even more specifically of trust into the fray. Now I lay me down to sleep is a Christian prayer often used as a comfort to children and a simple way to teach them how to communicate with God before bedtime. The closing lines, "If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take," is a direct acknowledgement of the fleeting nature of life and the fragility of the physical body. It attempts to remedy such a fragility with the trust that what makes a person, their soul, the essence of their being, is something that will be protected even in death, trusted in the hands of an omnipotent, higher power. As touched on when discussing the dining room, religion often plays its part in family structures and is one of the many factors that might play into that consumption, the manifestation of the process of being shaped and defined by your surroundings. Even homes that do not actively practice a religion can be affected by these larger structures, these larger bodies of belief. For example, I am the child of Irish immigrants with Catholic roots. I was born in the UK and raised without a specific worship, but still my upbringing was heavily spiked by the intense residue of Catholicism that shaped the generations before me. All the belief systems, the potential traumas, prejudices, judgments about other people, other beliefs, and the world do not get washed away by simply not believing in God anymore. The inclusion of religion, prayer, and spirituality, especially in this othered bedroom, is not necessarily there to comment on Christianity specifically, but are another allusion to the shaping of identity and how this is done across generations, dictated and influenced by structures larger than the house itself, and not within the boundaries of a single body. This is what really strengthens the feeling of these bedrooms seeming to represent parts of the same individual rather than exclusively being a literal reconstruction of a family home. While the purple room appears to be the chosen space for the dreaming mind of this individual, the green room seems to represent a collapse of internal and external boundaries, a collapsing of dream and reality, body and soul, safety and threat. The prayer and previous master bedroom tape introduce trust and its betrayal as the key mechanisms of that boundary collapse. A child trusts their parents to nourish them, protect them, to know what is best for them. Like God, they trust their parents to protect their soul even when the fragility of their bodies create fear, pain, or crisis. If a body is indistinguishable from the house it inhabits, and if a house is indistinguishable from the bodies and beliefs that dictate its form, then what does it mean to be green in a world born from red? What happens to the soul of a body that God has already deemed to be all wrong? The horror of the green room bleeds beyond a feeling of intrusion. For me, standing in this room, I felt a sense of mourning, of sadness, an acknowledgement that identity, belief, bodies, and even the soul itself can not only be shaped, but potentially condemned by inherited structures beyond one's control. To exist within these parameters is to be carved into and digested by forces both visible and unseen, and render an inhabitant as never entirely separate from the structures that define how they should be presented, where they should fit in, even if those definitions do not feel like home. This is fully realised through the renewed imagery that can be found in the master bedroom during the second run too. Where once there were teeth, now are these images, all of which serve to compound what we have already explored. First is a 15th century image depicting the city of Jerusalem from a collection of drawings, maps, and descriptions that detailed the experience of pilgrims journeying to the Holy Land to bring back their findings and interpretations to Europe. This builds on that idea of inherited systems, beliefs, and influences, and expands it beyond the walls of the home to faraway places which hold the authority and weight of history. Where a family might use ancient or generational rules to enforce the shape of their home. The depiction of a holy land is the cosmic and unreachable space from which the small bedtime prayer is born. The child can put their trust in God because it is built upon the foundations of buildings and spaces that promise that belief is well-founded and will grant safety. The idea of an ancient belief then bleeds into cosmic consequence. Above the bed now is an unsettling version of the dream-made reality images we saw in the children's rooms. A young woman lies asleep as a devil perches upon her motionless body. This is the explicit manifestation of fear, a nightmare rather than a dream, and feels just as tangible as the green room's animated dolls, which teetered between whimsical and unnerving. The devil-like nature of this creature holds a lot of weight when coalesced with the religious overtones here. This is another depiction of a betrayal of the conditions that are supposed to ensure safety, only this extends it into the parental space as well. I found it very telling that once again, this is an image of a woman. This being the parental space could easily depict a couple, but this choice imbues the entire house with a sense that it is constructed from a system where scrutiny, dissection, sin, and punishment fall most explicitly on female bodies. This only felt more apparent to me as I discovered this final image. This photograph is taken from a series produced by Miss Ruth Kellogg in the 1920s, demonstrating the correct postures for various household tasks and chores. This brings in the idea of enforcement upon the body, the performance of roles, of domestic expectations as a structure itself. An image that shows a woman how to stand, how to move, how to exist properly within a home, turns this room into the origin point for how the system enforces itself. These images within the parental room collectively depict and enforce the full process of being shaped, of being consumed by a system. Belief is inherited, often from places unreachable and unknowable, is internalized as fear, self-hatred, or judgment, and then, finally, it is imposed upon the body through roles and rules. Anatomy seems to be inviting its players to experience the consequence of what happens to a structure under the weight of these impositions. Something that is catastrophic yet mostly quiet, hidden from view behind closed doors and drawn curtains. The final tape of this second run is again the most elucidating one.
The bedroom is perhaps the room that most eludes direct comparison in this fashion. At a stretch, and allowing for a bit of poetic sympathy, it might be said that the bedroom is not unlike the human mind, or those parts of it which dictate thought and imagination. In the bedroom,
I dream that there are teeth growing all over me, everywhere on me and in me, like cysts or bone spurs. They're loose, but I can't remove them because I have no hands. I look out through the bedroom window and I see a truck approaching. A young man steps out, approaches and enters through the front door. His body is covered in swollen ticks the size of quarters. He's walking through the downstairs hallway and laughing. He begins urinating on the wall. He spits on the carpet. He's moving through the first floor, breaking and upsetting things. He goes to the basement and stands at the top of the stairs. I'm angry at him, so I slam the door and he falls down. I can feel his bones snapping. The techs are bursting, oozing all black blood everywhere. I can feel them being ground up, dissolved and torn, splitting and shredding. I leave the door closed. I close my eyes and try to sleep. The teeth continue growing on me until there's nothing left of me but teeth and gums and sinew.
The basement is dark.
Deeply unsettling as this tape is, its function is not the introduction of a new horror, but rather a synthesis of everything we have already been exposed to. That androgynous, authoritative voice that has prepared and led us from room to room, organ to organ, breaks down entirely. It shifts into a distinctly feminine one that morphs the tape from an instructional, distant guide to a fully internalized, personal description of how it actually feels to embody this house. This marks a turning point where the authority of the house is not enacted through an external voice, but rather is an immediate, alive, singular account. The story is particularly striking as well when we consider that this is the first time an explicitly masculine human figure has been identified. Before the man even enters the home, the voice notes how she is already covered in loose teeth and that she has no hands with which to move them. This body or essence of a person existing within the house has already been long shaped by it, a process which has left her without real agency. The idea that she has no hands isn't only there to suggest physical immobility or limitation, but is the consequence of this shaping, a body made unable to grip onto or take control of the system that forms it. It brings my mind back to the images of the artificial hand and the foot of the water beetle. For this voice, any negotiation or realm of evolved agency has been removed. Now she is fully subject to the structure. The teeth suggest that the consumption the house enacts has become entirely self-generated as well. When a body is blurred with the system that attempts to control it, it will begin to eat itself without having to be told. The external consumption mechanisms, such as the house itself and the inherited systems that shape it, merge with the internal ones we saw in the image of the mite, the placenta, and the idea of a quiet, absorbed influence. What was previously part of the house in the images of teeth, what represented the act of being devoured by something outside of the self, now grows inside the subject herself. This is where that idea of collapse is fully consummated. The boundary between consumer and consumed crumbles away. The intrusion of a male figure covered in ticks, parasites which correlate with the image of the mite from earlier, turns the idea of invasion and infestation into another integral part of the structure itself. If a house is both an amalgamation of all outside influences, but is also the structure of a singular person, of course, every body will contain feminine and masculine elements that may not necessarily be alluding to a particular person, like a father or brother, but rather the internal shaping of what roles and identities mean when they are enforced. In this case, the formation of a self, of an identity, has clearly been heavily shaped by certain imposed roles and ideas that exist within this house. Thus far, the feminine aspects of the house have been the bodies upon which sin and punishment fall most explicitly, where roles and behaviours feel most critical to present correctly, and whose bodies may be most vulnerable to the betrayal of trust, where an unconscious, slumbering girl becomes indistinguishable from the objects around her. The male presence in this tape is invasive, destructive, and careless, and most strikingly, he is the vessel through which contamination is carried. He introduces parasites inside, he laughs, spits, urinates on the walls, and breaks things. Because this voice begins their story with the idea of this being a dream inside the bedroom or dreaming mind of the house, it made me think of the images on those walls in the rooms. Each one depicts a kind of intrusion similar to the story on the tape, the entrance of an outside figure from the dreaming mind into the waking world. In the purple room, the ghostly figure is Santa Claus, one of the most well-known male house intruders of all time, one with a positive and caring feeling about him. However, there is an absence that comes with him too, the cosmic distance of a man who brings you everything you might dream to have, but who cannot be seen, felt, or truly known. In the green room, it's the masculine appearance of these dolls, objects of play and childlike pleasure, but who once again cannot be fully known, cannot inhabit a true mutual space. In the form of inanimate dolls, they become vessels of the child's desires. They only behave or feel as the child imagines they do, and in their state of animation, they take on a strangely unsettling feeling of threat. In the master bedroom, it's the incubus sitting on the woman's chest, a male devil. There is an added layer to the inclusion of this particular piece. Here, sexuality is introduced given that this is the parental bedroom, and especially when considering the erotic overtones this and similar art pieces from this era were imbued with. For example, Henry Fuseli's famous piece, The Nightmare, has long been cited as the inspiration for many depictions of unconscious sensuality in art, and the similarities here are obvious. There are many interpretations of this work, one being that the incubus on the woman's chest acts as a symbol of male libido, with the horse or literal nightmare representing the intrusive nature of penetration. Stories of incubi often tell of the seduction of young women, causing nightmarish visions, the feeling of one's chest being crushed, and sleep paralysis. Their intrusion was thought to drain a woman's vitality or cause unwanted pregnancy. With the context of our surroundings and the idea of consumption in mind, the incubus, just like the grip of the water beetle's foot, becomes a symbol of imposition upon the body. It is a manifestation of desire, control, and violation upon a subject that is at her most vulnerable. This mirrors the speaker on the tape who is immobilized, forced to experience the consequence of a contaminating intrusion that she has no agency over. What seems to be becoming increasingly clear as we crawl further into this dissection is that in this house, masculinity and masculine figures are not external threats, but act as the internal mechanism through which the system is performed. The young man in the story is not a fully formed individual with clear motives or identity either. He is the carrier of disruption, of contamination. The ticks that feed on him so voraciously that they are swollen fat with his blood make this undeniable. He is an extension of the parasitic logic the house already operates under. Just as we feel both like an intruder and inhabitant, so does he, and so indeed does the speaker, who is both immobilized by the house, confined in the bedroom, yet able to close the basement door. The closing scene of the story, where the speaker seems to perform an act of resistance by slamming that door into the intruder as he plummets down the stairs, is reframed when we consider that every element at play here is part of the same structure. This impression of control exerted from anger is undermined by the fact that both she and the house can feel the physical sensations of the young man. We can feel his bones snapping. We can feel him being ground up, dissolved and torn, splitting and shredding. The bursting ticks, though locked out of sight now, still contaminate the basement with the black blood. The speaker still has no hands, the teeth continue to grow, unable to be moved. The transformation from an individual to a vessel of consumption alone, a mouth of teeth, gums and sinew, has not been halted by the closing away of this intruder. In fact, the final line of "the basement is dark" spells it out even further. The speaker is as much the young man digested by the shadow of the basement as she is the consciousness on the tape or in the bedroom, and she is as much the watchful windows of the house as she is the teeth of a disembodied mouth. A person becomes the space they inhabit and intrude upon with their inevitable individuality. Closing a door that exists within your own body simply conceals the consumption, does not stop it. This moment again ties into the notion of trust and safety within the home that we explored earlier, where the physical boundaries of doors, walls, and rooms might be imagined as protective barriers that keep harm at bay. Anatomy realizes the reality that those boundaries can be unreliable, unstable, and even complicit in the process of invasion and consumption they should defend against. In some houses, intrusion is organized, assigned, contained, and integrated. This story takes all of the external observations about the anatomy of a house, of the room's images and tapes, and culminates it all into a fully internalized space in which there is no more meaningful separation between a body and the house that has shaped it. A home cannot just be a place that one moves through or that one can possibly leave behind, but becomes inextricable from you as a person. That is truly where the horror, dread, and helpless draw into this familiar unease lies. That distinction between invader and inhabitant is dissolved with the destruction of the male figure. His body is torn apart, yet still lingering in the dark. The speaker can only make an attempt to go back to sleep and re-enter that space of God-protected trust, but the body refuses. After all, this is already a dream. All of these boundaries have already collapsed together. Her final state is one of being overtaken until there is no longer a self to be defined in the mess of teeth, rooms, blood, and parasites. Only the mechanism of consumption can survive in such a place. What is shut away in the basement is unresolved, only hidden away, and even as we are once again invited into a mouth at the conclusion of the tape, the basement door opening itself and inviting us into its jaws, as we mirror the descent from the story, the game once again ejects us from its gaping depths by crashing. Starting the game for a third time, the distortion is now unmistakable and significantly more intense. The opening screen, purple, glitchy, and unreadable, leads the player directly into the master bedroom rather than the entryway. We are facing the corner, a starting position I couldn't help but find evocative of a kind of shame-based punishment. If windows are eyes, this room is now overrun with looming, watchful pains. They have replaced every wall hanging except for the paralyzing invasion of a waking nightmare above the bed, now so large and overtaking that it insists on being the lasting impression of this room. Much of the house's contents have changed. Some erased entirely, others deformed into multiple versions of themselves. What remains often appears as strange, abstract fragments of former structures, stabbing through what should be solid or quivering in and out of existence. the instability of this structure, though abundantly evident now in this state, remains contained within the house. There is still no escape, no alternate route. As you descend the stairs and into the kitchen, a tape awaits, as always. The once clear, authoritative voice is no more, with only hints of words remaining in fractured pieces, and the softer voice that gave a more individual account seems to be gone. What remains in their stead are garbled, machine-like noises colliding with guttural growls and purrs, as if we have descended into a deeper, more animalistic layer of the house, something raw, unprocessed, and without speech with which to properly navigate or understand it. The clearest on-screen prompt after any tape is a single word: hurts, with no indication of how to stop it, nor where it originates. Yet we now seem entirely tied into this system. Through dissecting and inhabiting the house, we still know, despite each unintelligible cacophony, where to go next, where tapes can be found, how to progress. Though the most terrifying part of anatomy is perhaps the fact that nothing feels like a typical progression from a beginning to an end. The experience is less like advancing from point A to point B and more like being slowly digested within a stagnant, inescapable atmosphere, like being dragged back and forth through the same stomach acid again and again and again. I felt parts of myself being sapped away, at times becoming strangely at ease with the house, feeling I know it now, before the creeping sensation that perhaps a broken plate or a TV left on could change everything in a moment. The rooms remained constant. They never changed position or disappeared entirely, yet they were also unforgivingly disorientating and unstable, to the point where everywhere felt both threatening and painfully delicate. For me, exploring a home that already felt so familiar and carried such a personal weight in the sources of its horror made my immediate reactions to this iteration particularly telling. I feel like I'm gonna die. Oh, everything's gone a bit wrong, hasn't it, Puppet? I'm being stabbed. God, it does really feel like the whole house is in pain. I don't want to hurt you. Please let me help you. Hurts. It does. God, I almost feel like I've got this like pang of intense empathy just reading that. Okay. When I saw the intrusive, fractured lines cutting through the house, it really did feel like I was being stabbed. There is something deeply affecting about the way anatomy is structured and presented that made this sense of terror, familiarity, and a sort of mournful longing rise up within me. If you come from a deeply dysfunctional household or have a background where there's trauma from things like religion, addiction, generational abuse, undiagnosed mental illness, or neurodivergence, all these differently inherited but deeply rooted things, you'll know that feeling that I'm trying to convey here. It's a feeling born from the absence of emotional boundaries in a household, where things penetrate the walls and bleed into one another. As much pain as someone in a structure like this can cause you, you might also feel a deep devotion towards them, a loyalty and trust that persists even when it is repeatedly broken. You might be expected to be unwaveringly loyal, fixed into your place within the structure. Yet, in constantly erasing your inner self to perform that role, you are made to feel like an intruder in your own home, your own body, something all wrong, a faulty piece upon which frustration and blame can fall. At the same time, this intense process of being consumed is the only experience of love or family that one might have. If this is normality, then it only feels wrong in hindsight once realities outside the structure of the house have been discovered. In this way, looking back at a family home can feel both like a distant nightmare and a physical wound you feel compelled to treat. But the wound, like the house, has teeth. As I entered the living room in this third iteration of the house, I found that the two sources of light, the lamp and the TV, had changed drastically. The standing lamp no longer gently illuminates the living room and dining room, but instead coats them in the fractured, harsh magenta usually seen in games to indicate an error, a missing texture, or an incompatibility. I quite liked the meta implications of this, that this source of comfort and one of our exceptionally limited means of agency in this house is corrupted, lost, or no longer compatible with our continued dissection. The once comforting blue light of the TV was now a harsh red, with the words, "You never came back," emblazoned across the screen accusatorily. A persistent static hum blasts from the set, and it can no longer be turned off again at will like it could previously. It is a sentiment that cannot be ignored. For me, this screen, a once strangely comforting source of a basic need for navigation, light, perfectly encapsulated the conflict at the center of a house like this. The intense desire to keep you inside the walls of the structure, to meld you to it and to absorb you entirely, meeting the ferocious rage at any struggle you may have to stay fused to the system that slowly digests you. Amputating yourself from such a system inevitably causes pain, anger, sadness, and loss, emotions that persist in both the severed limb and what has been left behind. Notably, it also takes a great level of understanding and time indeed to make something new of yourself that is not just a propagation growing the same thing over again, continuing this endless merging with the structure you came from, even when you leave. This screen can also be looked at in an internalized way. When we fully abandon ourselves, losing the essence of our being in order to contort within molds that others have deemed more acceptable, that abandoned self, the parts we try to shut away or murder, do not simply disappear quietly. It is absolutely possible to abandon yourself and start a lifelong internal war between a performing facade and an internal self that screams and rages that you never came back for them. The magenta light is an extension of this. The incompatibility of trying to explore, know, and understand a system to illuminate its inner workings creates a contradiction. To try and know yourself or to be truly known while also consuming yourself is going to make turning on a light feel deeply confusing, broken, and wrong. The house expresses pain explicitly now, both within words and through its physical deterioration. This feeling is inescapable and seeps into you no matter which room you're in. But a sense of pure, abject horror and pain is perhaps most visceral in the green room. Compared to the purple room, where both the physical bed and the bed within the photograph now cling to the ceiling, the green room is surprisingly grounded. Almost as if the items in their desperation to maintain stability have become nailed to the floor, a performance of normalcy inside what is otherwise clearly struggling to stay together. What has changed here, however, feels far more intrusive and agonizing than in any other space. The images that most explicitly communicated intrusion have all grown monstrously in scale, with the dreamland etching now looming over the space here. Intrusion images from other bedrooms have also expanded, even protruding through walls and ceilings, alongside the surgically prized open mouth and throat that once occupied the master bedroom, now flickering grotesquely in place of the front door. In the green room, intrusion is no longer just implied, however. It is now made flesh. An undulating tentacle clings to the wall in the corner. Further fractured structures pierce through the space, resembling insectile limbs. In a room I had come to associate with total boundary collapse, with its mixture of rejection, intrusion, and frantic loyalty expressed through the manic recitation of the bedtime prayer, this presence feels heavy, inescapable, and indeed deeply violating. The form of the tentacle intensified this feeling for me. Its phallic shape builds upon the earlier sense of penetrative intrusion established by the incubus image in the master bedroom. What was once symbolic or contained suggestively within an image has now breached the structure entirely, becoming part of the room itself. The house no longer merely suggests intrusion, but begins to explicitly embody it. This transformation also marks a deeper collapse in the logic of the house, and in tandem, the logic of a body trying to thrive whilst being shaped and consumed. The expected material of its architecture is betrayed as it gives way to something organic and undeniably alive. The boundary between structure and flesh is now physically eroded, reframing the body as a site not of containment but of invasion. Through this framing, the tentacle feels like a nightmarish distortion of imposed identity, one that signifies an intrusion of enforced binary demands upon a body, essentially where what might otherwise be part of a natural process of self-discovery is instead rendered as something overwhelming, alien, and impossible to escape. A home is where bodies and minds develop, where behaviors and identities are shaped and reinforced. Under these conditions, the body itself becomes a site of extreme discomfort, something to be inhabited but not controlled, experienced but not understood. The intrusion is no longer external, it is inseparable from the structure itself. This really mirrors what we heard in the tape earlier during the intruder story, how both the voice and the house itself could feel the physical injuries of the intruder. If the house is both the sum of a person and the space in which they are formed, then what appears here, like the intruder story tape, is not only there to incite fear in the player, but is a manifestation of the lived experience of embodiment under pressure, where the body, like the house, becomes something that overtakes, intrudes upon, and ultimately consumes itself. The impossibility to resist or escape the inevitability of your own body and the structure it is born into leaves no room for negotiation or words. In the truth of this room, there is no space for desperate prayers anymore. Upon pressing play on the player, only endless, unstoppable screams remain. Just like the angry red screen of the TV, once this starts, it cannot be turned off, and the screams can even be heard through the walls, intruding upon the purple bedroom. In fact, the glow of the TV intrudes as well. This pain, fear, and rage extend to every room, belong to every part of the system and every part of the individual. It is absolute and devastating. But what I found most striking was the screaming itself. Though clearly pained and helpless, something about the rhythmic nature of it reminded me of breathing. The screech seems to inhale and exhale, as if terror, wretched pain, and despair are interwoven into the most basic function of life. In a house where you are born to be consumed, to have a body at all, to be alive, to simply breathe, is to scream in endless horror and discomfort. The final tape of this third run is an abridged version of the entire house dissection.
If we were to dissect the house, we would find organs and stomach, brains and minds and eyes, teeth, dreams and memories and a mouth that will bite down.
The once careful theoretical breakdown of the house's anatomy is collapsed into a single sentence. The house is no longer an object of study. The previous methodical exploration of each room, trying to objectively understand every organ, every structure, has completely dissolved now, as there is no more distinction between house and body at all. Theory has become reality, architecture has become flesh. This collapse into a singular form marks the end of the dissection as well. After all, there is no more meaningful distance between us and the house we stand inside. Suddenly, the player is pushed back without being touched, building on that feeling of becoming part of the system. Just as the earlier voice from the tape that spoke of slamming the intruder down the basement stairs without having to move or leave the bedroom, we too are manipulable simply because we are assimilated into this structure that acts as one. The house no longer requires the player to move through it, and as such, it plugs closed the only way back with a fleshy membrane. This physical pushback and closing off are not contradictory to the idea of assimilation, because the player is not at all free or separate from the structure. Instead, the player has become absorbed enough into the larger organism that the privilege of observation is revoked entirely. The house is a closed body, self-contained and complete. You are, as you always have been, as much an intruder within it as you are a part, to be fully absorbed. The horror as one realizes that the basement door is now the only place open, its door removed in fact, is the realization that being shut out, or rather shut in, is a part of the process of consumption, not a chance for freedom. That expulsion does not unshackle you from what has already taken root. Descending into the basement does not result in an abrupt crash this time, but rather another more overt baring of teeth.
There is an important distinction that must be drawn between the words dissection and vivisection, a distinction that would appear to be lost on you. Your purpose was to listen, and yet at every turn you have pried, you have prodded, and you have interfered. Have you not been paying attention? Did it not occur to you that as an organism existing within a greater organism, your intrusion would be felt? And still you harassed. And now, like the wayward spider who witlessly settles upon a sweeper's tongue, you will be swallowed. Because the truth is this. When a house is both hungry and awake, every room becomes a mouth.
What makes this final descent into the basement so potent and disarming is the return of the analytical voice. No longer emanating from a tape, no longer feeling like a distant authority guiding us through the house. The role of this voice is utterly transformed in a moment. What was once clinical and detached is revealed to belong to the organism, just as everything always has. The voice was never neutral, and neither were we. Both have been embedded in the structure from the start. This space was framed as the unconscious mind, but it is also a space we know to be capable of digestion, a space where what is most disruptive, difficult, or resistant to integration can be controlled, subdued, crushed, and hidden from view. This is visually reflected in the basement's transformation. The red intrusions that spread across the space resemble veins and nerves, alongside the black ones which, again, always draw my mind to insectile limbs. Here they feel less like intruders which stab and prey on the house, and more like appendages the house might use against us. The reality is that both are true. In such a state of being, experiencing pain and inflicting it become interchangeable. This is self-consumption. Biological function and infestation also collapse here too, where insects could be defined as parasites, invaders that are ultimately separate from the system and should be removed. Anatomy does not distinguish them as such. They are shut into the basement. They line the upper hallway. They are not banished. Here in the basement, parasites converge with the organism itself, just as they did in the intruder story, with the house and voice feeling the intrusive body, the body being torn apart, the ticks filled with his blood bursting and staining the space, shut away but remaining. The basement becomes the most explicit articulation of the house as a living system. It is flesh, blood, thought, and movement. It is alive in a way that can no longer be hidden behind layers of metaphor or detached theoretical framings. It cannot be ignored. This is reinforced by the slow reveal of large, sharp teeth protruding from above and below. Teeth are no longer confined to images or words. They line the room itself, creating an enclosure which transforms the basement into a mouth. What was used abstractly to describe the process of consumption becomes the literal architectural mechanism that intends to devour us. The monologue's accusation becomes central here, especially when considering the difference between dissection and vivisection. The analytical nature of the voice alongside the dormant feeling of the house during the first iteration started us off with a sense of distance. Though the feelings of familiarity and intrusion are there from the start, the player begins with the tentative belief that they are examining the house as an object or corpse, the likening of its rooms and hallways to various organs and human parts being part of an analogy to be explored. The monologue not only confirms what has been gradually making itself clear throughout these acts, that this traversal was akin to cutting open something living and aware, but it integrates us into the structure as the violator, the unwanted intruder. Rather than staying out of the house after the first act, in order to reach this far, a player will have had to willingly reopen the game, reopen the house, reopen the body, an act that caused visible degradation, emotional despair, and structural instability. Equally, the further you go into this game, the more acts you experience, the more afraid, unnerved, and even sorrowful a player might feel. I know I found myself rather desperate to understand this house, to discover the sources of its pain, to perhaps uncover something close to a resolution. There is a draw to return as much as to be emancipated. On my first run, I thoughtlessly broke all the plates just because I saw that you could. Hearing this accusation of violation and intrusion here in the basement made me question everything I had done. Was it the broken plates? Did I open too many doors? Should I have left the green room alone? Through subsequent replays, I attempted all manner of alterations to my behavior to try and help the house see that surely I belong here and I meant no harm. But I discovered that no matter what you do, this sequence will always play. Your very existence here is the intrusion. The bottom line is that this confrontation will always happen. It is a part of the structure itself. It is part of your role within it. In trying to understand the mechanisms of consumption, the player enacts them and is thus consumed in turn. The comparison made between the player and a wayward spider witlessly settling on a sleeper's tongue is an important sharpening of this image. This casting reinforces everything we have explored about the systems that create consumption. The intrusion of a witless spider is accidental, and the reflexive swallowing of the vulnerable sleeper is an instinctive reaction to an unwanted presence. In this metaphor, presumably, the spider does not want to be swallowed, nor does the sleeper want or even know they are doing the swallowing. In our most vulnerable state, we will gulp down, close away, and digest what should not be there, often automatically and without thought. The idea of what should or should not be within a structure is dictated not by the individual who does the swallowing, but by the complicated anatomy of the bodies they inhabit, physical, familial, cultural, spiritual, and beyond. The illusion of agency is entirely undone here, no matter how careful or deliberate this exploration might have seemed, either through the storytelling of the tapes or the choices we make. Agency here will always be woefully insignificant within the scale of a larger organism. Essentially, the small, intimate strategies an individual develops to survive, rituals, prayers, performances, acts of obedience or resistance, remain painfully small beneath the immense structures that shape, consume, and define them, especially when we cannot escape the space of ongoing consumption. The confrontation is punctuated by a final line, one of my favourites in the entire game. When a house is both hungry and awake, every room becomes a mouth. Earlier, certain spaces were treated as sites of betrayal, conformity, familiarity, or consumption, making some areas feel safer than others. For example, my earlier comments about the blue light of the TV feeling comforting, or the ritualistic nature of the tape player always being in the kitchen, and the voice, at first, always being the same steady, distant guide, and how that brought stability. Now, any prior attempt to distinguish rooms as safe or dangerous is rendered obsolete. Hunger is the prevailing force that is born from this manner of structure. There is no refuge here because every part participates in the act of ravenous devouring. This shaping, this consumption is not confined to a single organ, one memory, one event, one person, one point in time. It is systemic and quite literally architectural. Every room is a mouth because every force that shapes us is instilled with the innate capacity to consume. The slow animation of the house, the appearance of windows as if its eyes had opened, and the overt signs of movement that communicated this space is awake, is alive, force us to recognize here in the closing jaws of the basement that hunger is a form of communication. The hunger of the house, of the body, is the cry for acknowledgement, to have a need met. This moment, along with the master bedroom bite, begins to suggest something painfully tragic about the house and about human beings. The further and longer this consumption of the self goes on, the hungrier one becomes. Before we sink our teeth into the endings, I wanted to preface this chapter by saying that I did multiple hours of testing in anatomy, attempting to discover if endings could be reliably replicated through specific actions. But I can say semi-confidently that the ending you get is chosen at random, and after many playthroughs, I only ever saw these 5 variations. Therefore, my interpretations will be based on that understanding, even if there is a possibility that some actions influence things more than I know, or there may be other endings and possibilities I was just not able to uncover during my time with the game. I will dissect, or vivisect, these endings one by one, and though there are no official names for them, I gave them my own, listing them in my notes as the Blood Lake ending, the Red Maze ending, the Blue Maze ending, the Stomach ending, and the Street ending. The "You Never Came Back" red screen insists its importance by forcing itself upon players before the chosen ending sequence plays. This happens no matter what, and immediately soaks every ending variation with the feeling of rage, abandonment, and pain that this screen evokes. However, I personally found that the sequences themselves each left me with a different, lingering emotion before the final monologue that always plays at their conclusion, which, rest assured, we will get to afterwards. So they're worth breaking down one by one. The Blood Lake ending was the first I experienced. Players are transported to a vast, barren area filled with the red and black veins that we were confronted with in the basement. At first glance, it appears to be outside, the black spines now resembling trees, and what appears to be a dark sky scattered with red clouds looming above us. However, walking up the dirt-like mounds of ground reveals that we are still in the basement, closed in by the same walls and unable to escape. Walking towards the center of the area, players are confronted by a large red lake which can be entered. Somewhere in the mass of crimson water is the house itself, levitating just above the shallow lake. Barely audible beneath the persistent, ambient hum is a strange sound that emanates from the building itself, and was one of the only ways I was actually able to find it in this expansive and immensely dark area. It's a gurgling, whirring sound that feels almost like a mix between an old boiler and a growling stomach. The sound grows louder and more intense as you approach the front door, which now sits on the underside of the house. Entering the door crashes the game. The Red Maze ending sees players standing atop a maze-like structure surrounded by glitching red veins. We are on top of the maze walls, which are immensely tall, only an endless darkness to be seen at the bottom of them. You cannot jump down, and it is not clear if there is any end to this area, as your view is so limited, and you are only allowed to walk a short distance before the sequence ends. The audio is once again harsh and relentless, this time an unintelligible voice murmuring through static. The same glitchy screen before the earlier basement crash overtakes our view before enormous tape players surround the maze, hanging ominously in the darkness. Their appearance is accompanied by a repetitive noise that I can only describe as being a hissy, animalistic screeching, which comes to an abrupt end as again the game crashes. The blue maze ending is more like an abandoned neighborhood than a maze when compared to its red counterpart, but when I got this ending, it made me realize that the red maze was something like a completely gutted version of this, as if the structures seen here had sunk to the depths of hell and left only darkness and a blood-red path in their wake. It also reminds me of the Blood Lake ending in that it appears to be outside. It too has those tree-like structures and a night sky above. You can even see the moon, stars, and white clouds. Unlike the red maze, you can walk these paths continually until you come across the house, taking up one of the spots amongst the other structures, which all appear as empty frames with long spiked beams that point up towards the sky. The interesting thing about these structures is that they seem to be neither in progress nor abandoned. They are uniform, empty shells standing in place of where other homes should be. The house we have explored is the only complete structure here, easily recognizable by its front and back doors along with the garage. Again, the front door beckons us with that strange, gurgling whirring sound, crashing once you interact with it. The stomach ending feels like the most hostile and unforgiving of them all. Players are transported into an entirely organic-looking cavity that truly felt like the stomach of the house. Here, transformation has veered dramatically into the literal, where parts of the house are embedded into the fleshy structure of what is clearly living tissue. I can only describe the sound design here as an assault. The humming, crackling, and static are so relentless that it almost made me nauseous. I struggled to determine whether we had become as small as that engulfed witless spider, or if the parts of the house that remained here amongst the viscera had grown large and imposing instead. In the depths of the undulating fleshy walls is a tape which transforms into a regular-sized player once picked up. The player starts spouting unintelligible garbled words before again the game crashes. The final ending variation, the street ending, finds us transported to a place that almost resembles a normal neighborhood. Unlike the blue maze ending, there are many other houses here, though they are still uniform and unmarked by any individuality or differential attributes you might expect to see. The ground is a pinkish red colour, and everything is still surrounded by an aggressive net of those vein-like structures that run through every one of these environments, imbuing this space with a feeling of organic life. At the end of the path is a slightly larger version of the uniform houses that line up either side of us. Notably, you can only walk forwards in this ending. Attempting to press other keys results in the player standing still, and you cannot turn your head to look around either. You are intermittently teleported slightly further ahead as you walk, until a lone door comes into view, unattached to any house and glitching in and out of existence. You never get to reach the door, before again, the game crashes. Now that I've given you an overview of those 5 sequences, I'm going to analyse them as a collection. The reason I'm not treating them separately is in part due to the fact that there does not seem to be a correlation between our actions and which outcome you receive at the end of each run, but also because even when trying to separate them as distinct conclusions with different meanings, they all point towards the same structural truth. While each environment does carry its own prevailing emotional ambience, none of them truly stray from the logic of the house that we have been subject to all along. Sure, this logic is displaced and abstracted into what appear to be different terrains, imbued with varying degrees of hostility. But even in the places that are aesthetically far removed from the internals of the house, such as the center of the blood lake or under the moonlit sky of the blue maze, there is still no real escape from the structures that consume. The blood lake is still contained by the basement walls. The blue maze still exists within a finite world that offers nothing beyond the only structure that is allowed to fully take form, the house. All that has happened is that in these variants, the domestic, hungering structure has spilled out into liquid, dirt, concrete, skies, and flesh, confirming what we have already come to understand, that the house is not a singular site of consumption, but a contained part within larger systems of inheritance and control. These ending environments not only withhold true escape or resolution, but reinforce the feeling of helplessness that living within a consuming body inflicts. Even when the world appears widened into exterior landscapes or vast expanses, this illusion of freedom is always undercut by either physical enclosure, abrupt collapse through the crashes, or lack of true control, such as only being able to walk forward in the street ending, or only being able to end the sequence by re-entering the house again in the Blood Lake and Blue Maze endings. What appears to be freedom or change is always revealed to be part of the same organism, leading back into the same cycle. Expansion is only there as a revelation of the scale we explored earlier, how the shaping that takes place inside a house is often informed by larger structures outside of it, as well as becoming self-generated if we learn to consume and abandon ourselves. A player never truly leaves the house. They are merely permitted to see visual representations of just how far the architecture extends beyond it, through social structures, physical processes, and shared spaces where all houses look identical. Through this framing, each seeming extension or escape externalizes the different emotional aspects of the house's logic. Its hunger can become digestion, replication, conformity, or an endless, terrifying traversal with no structures left to cling to. No matter the outcome, none allow what most players are likely driven by. Why would someone reopen the game so many times, replay and reconfigure their actions again and again and again, hoping something might change, hoping to find some prevailing pattern or resolution? Closure. Anatomy's ending variations all deny it. Each one terminates before entry, solution, understanding, escape, or contact can be made. Consumption continues on, unresolved. Anatomy's message here is that this self-destructive manner of hunger and consumption are larger than the player's capacity to address here in game. They are ancient, generational, systemic, and it is not possible to escape them whilst actively being consumed by them. There is a draw to engage with them and come back into the jaws of the house over and over. We know this because without that draw, we never would have reached the end at all. But the tragic beauty of anatomy, in my mind, is that resolution can only be found outside of the structure by considering what the story is saying and using it to think more deeply about how we treat our own bodies out here in the structures and houses we actually inhabit. What unites these endings most profoundly is the sense that the house persists beyond any one story, room, or body. It persists through our relentless exploration, no matter how many times we reopen it. And we still have no agency over its concluding monologue. The closing words, never change because they articulate the irrefutable tragedy that often grows at the center of such consumed and hungry bodies. The monologue sees the return of the feminine personal voice that told the intruder story earlier, and once again, she seems to represent the innermost voice within these structures. The more personal, human account at the center of the domestic house, which is the family body, inside the larger bodies of religion, culture, and societal norms. She conveys the individual cost of being consumed, shaped, and enforced, which was ultimately, for me, the most powerful message of the game. Starting Anatomy for the final time after experiencing one of those endings, you cannot move. We seem to be on our side, lying on the floor in the basement, with the tape player propped up on the wall just ahead. We cannot interact with it. We seem to no longer have hands, or perhaps even a body. A few moments pass by before the final tape starts to play.
What happens to a house when it is left alone? When it becomes worn and aged? When its paint peels and its foundations begin to sink? When it goes for too long unlived in? What does it think of? What does it dream? How does it regard those creatures who built it, brought it into existence only to abandon it when its usefulness no longer satisfies them? It may grow lonesome. It may stare for long hours into the darkness of its own empty halls and see shadows, and its heart may jump as it thinks, here is someone again, I'm not alone. And each time it is wrong, and the hurt starts over. It may haunt itself, inventing ghosts to walk its floors, making friends with its shadow puppets, laughing and whispering to itself at the end of some quiet cul-de-sac. It may grow angry. Its basement may fill with churning acid like an empty stomach, and its gorge may rise as it asks itself through clenched teeth, what did I do wrong? It may grow bitter. It may grow hungry. So hungry and so bitter that its scruples dissolve and its doors unlock themselves. While a house may hunger, it cannot starve. And so, in fever and anger and loneliness, it may simply lie in wait. Doors open, shades drawn, hallways empty, hungry.
When I first heard this monologue, it made me very emotional. I found the words devastatingly relatable, and I still get a sinking feeling at the thought that I cannot find a resolution for this voice. Her words are not merely tragic, however. As I listened, I understood that their purpose was to give a voice to what is often lost at the center of something as chaotic, deeply entrenched, and unforgiving as the systems and bodies that consume us. I had spent hours identifying the mechanisms of this house, questioning and altering my own behavior and approach, feeling terrified, uncertain, and lost as I swam back and forth in the digestive acid of these repeating rooms and organs. Here, At the end of everything, anatomy ensures that the final point of attention is fixed firmly on the conditions that create such a ravenous structure. The question moves from what happens when the body you inhabit begins to consume you to under what conditions is a body forced to consume itself. When looking at this speech, keep in mind that by now, a human body, the house they live in, and the structures and people that shape them are all entirely interchangeable here. So as much as this is a house, a structure that shapes and enforces, it is a body trying to exist within it as well. At the core of this speech is a deep sense of abandonment. A house is built just as a person is born, with hopes, purpose, and predetermined ideas of who and what that body will become. Existence is framed as conditional here, as the voice makes it clear that under these conditions, the body is created not for itself, but for others, and therefore its value is only tied to how well it can fulfill its predetermined role. If that body is unable to satisfy those needs, to live up to the expectations that have shaped bodies for generations before it was ever brought into existence, it is discarded. People, like houses, can be abandoned. There lies the hurt at the center of the monologue, and that has permeated each cycle of the house. What happens to a body that was created for others when it is no longer wanted, or it is unable to be what is expected of it? What purpose does that body have now? These questions and her inability to resolve them lead into her expressing of immense loneliness. She looks internally, mistaking her own shadows for company, suggesting how intense a desire for connection and purpose truly is. This cycle of loneliness, anticipation, and disappointment is formative. Everything she describes is happening internally, literally and figuratively. She describes looking down her own hallways and wishfully hoping that shadows might be companions. The house is shaped by repeated emotional injury and abandonment, where a body has been made to believe that the only way for them to belong is to adhere to an impossible and annihilating structure that consumes rather than nourishes. Naturally, when this structure is all a body has known, they will always look to the unavailable shadows within their own hallways for approval and love. When a person believes that the only way to be of value is to embody the predetermined role they were born into, they will consistently look for validation and resolution from those who created the structure that dictates who they are is not enough. Of course, when looking for validation in these places, resolution can never truly be found, because in one way or another, this structure creates abandonment and self-consumption. One will either bury themselves and perform a role, self-abandonment, or they will be unable or unwilling to perform as they are commanded, leading to disapproval and external abandonment. Without genuine connection and acceptance, a body will haunt itself, inventing ghosts, befriending those internal shadows, laughing and whispering to itself, creating internal substitutes for what has been withheld or rejected. This is the part of the tape that hit me the hardest. As a daydreamer who invented my own little world as a child, this part of the confession illustrates deprivation and the ways in which we learn to cope with it. When a system becomes so empty and alone that it must generate its own inhabitants, find friends in books, find meaning through games and characters. Welcome to the channel. This is a coping mechanism that satiates the slightest shred of hunger, but more so becomes an escape, an alternate space of exploration that is not permitted within the bounds of these closed structures. This escapism and desperate attempt to explore the self outside the structure is comforting, but does not truly satisfy while the body is still being consumed. Because of this, anger and frustration begin to emerge. Crucially, it does not start outwardly. The house does not demand exploration for why it was abandoned. She asks, "What did I do wrong?" This illustrates the formation of internalized blame, where a body cannot condemn those who abandon it, but rather condemns itself for not being able to embody what would make it worth embracing. The house, the body, starts to digest its own pain, turning the process of being consumed into a closed loop that exists within the body itself. This is where the self-annihilation and devouring begin. The more a body consumes itself, the hungrier it becomes, as the devouring only leaves more emptiness still unfilled by the solidarity and acceptance one craves to receive. By this part of the tape, the bitterness and hunger that have risen feel like natural responses to the loneliness, self-hatred, and unmet needs that sculpted their shape. The doors unlock not out of desire nor expectation to be entered by something that can satisfy, but rather as compulsion. The desperate hunger for contact has gone abandoned and unexplored so long that the body no longer maintains its thresholds, no longer differentiates inhabitant from intruder. The body longs to be known, to be entered, to be explored, and yet all that comes inside is swallowed, consumed, or discarded. The only mode of connection it knows is to consume, to devour, or to abandon. The line, "doors open, shades drawn, hallways empty," illustrates how disconnected they have become as a result of this conditional existence. Anyone might come inside, but they won't really be let in meaningfully. They will not truly inhabit their hallways or see through their drawn shades, because they do not even truly inhabit themselves. The desire for intimacy has become indistinguishable from self-destruction. The line, "while a house may hunger, it cannot starve," helps us understand the seeming contradiction of the inhabitant-intruder feeling even further. Bodies starved of self-acceptance and love cannot satisfy nor escape their own appetite for it. To accept and find meaning in one's own existence, a body must first realize that they have a purpose outside the system they were born into. As we saw from the variations of the ending sequences, attempting to escape, change, or understand the cycle of self-erasure is far more complicated than simply walking out the front door, if you can even open it at all. Anatomy recognizes the intensity of the powerlessness and misery that can come as a result of trying to survive in such conditions when you do not have the key. When you become the house yourself, inanimate, frozen, suspended in longing and emptiness. Earlier, the tapes spoke of the tremendous sympathy humans feel towards their homes.
Why do human beings of our modern age foster this tremendous sympathy toward their homes? Why do human beings of our modern age foster this tremendous sympathy?
When considering that the home is the building most representative of family, this plays an enormous part in the feeling of inescapability too. We often feel for those who are also shaped by the structure, also victim to it, even if they enact the same pain onto us as well. There is a sense of loyalty and solidarity there, even if houses, families, are the most immediate and major system of that enforced identity, that consumption. This final speech centers anatomy's most painful acknowledgement that bodies shaped by conditional worth, abandonment, and isolation will long and wait and hunger until the need itself becomes hollow and destructive. Anatomy is a game which explicitly asks its players to think in a poetic, abstract, and metaphorical way. And so the emotional journey I personally had through my experience of it naturally inspired me to come to my own conclusions about what one might take from a story like this, one that is so dark, so sad and helpless, and one which firmly refuses a clean closure or resolution. What hope could one possibly find here? Well, I feel it mirrors the reality of emancipating yourself from the structures that once consumed you, in that it isn't neat, linear, nor simple. But, having lived experience of it myself, there is a lot of hope to be found there. An abandoned home is not worthless, only neglected and unknown. If we have learned anything from the futility of trying to thrive within a house that consumes, it's that the answer to what we might take from anatomy is something internal, individual, and lies within the player. One of the most hopeful things I personally derive from stories like this is the feeling of being seen. In creating this world, Kitty Horror Show spoke to a feeling and experience I believe most of us will have endured or witnessed to varying degrees throughout life, the experience of being consumed, of being shaped, and the conflict between the loneliness of not being truly known and the horror that to be known might just mean destruction and rejection. The beauty of anatomy is that, in its ambiguity, it leaves room for a multitude of interpretations. The idea of being shaped and consumed by a house mirrors many deeply intrusive and sometimes self-annihilating experiences: gender dysphoria, body dysmorphia, autistic masking, chronic illness, generational abuse and trauma. The list could really go on. Ultimately, Kitty Horror Show does an incredible job of conveying the experience of being digested by your environment, by societal roles, and ultimately by yourself. In doing so, she not only taps into a visceral and deeply effective sense of dread, but also transforms an abstract sense of human suffering into something embodied and intimate, something that understands pain, something that feels familiar from the moment you arrive in that dark hallway. Through her use of environmental storytelling, she has created a complex tapestry of history, emotion, and sensory nostalgia that befits such a vast and intricately interwoven collection of human experiences. Anatomy is so powerful, terrifying, and touching because it captures a structural experience that manifests differently across lives. The experience of being shaped, alienated from, or consumed by forces larger than oneself. The inescapability of having a physical body upon which judgments, rules, and disapproval can fall, and the depth of discomfort and anxiety that creates. The monster is consumption itself in all its forms, and the tragedy is the desperate, lonely hunger one is left with. Sometimes to be truly known is as painful as to be destroyed. Your drawers pulled out, papers strewn across the floor, your deepest pains, fears, and dreams unraveled like intestines, spilling onto the linoleum. But in that painful unraveling of oneself, there is life to be found. What was once dormant, hollow, and resistant to exploration can be opened with love and tenderness outside of the system of consumption, when it's done on one's own terms. Even the most ravenous house can be satiated when placed in a supportive neighborhood, when filled with individuals who embrace and nourish rather than bite. Sometimes removing oneself from the structures we feel so utterly trapped by is the most painful part of all. As mentioned earlier, it can feel like an amputation, something that will leave a scar. But it is also the way towards reclaiming yourself. Painting over scars, decorating yourself with the things that bring a sense of closeness between the body and soul, creating a body that feels like it belongs to you. This is just one simple example, but it is perhaps not surprising with the context of everything we have explored in this video that the style I have always been drawn to is the antithesis of the type of woman my mother wished me to be. My rituals and the ways in which I build myself up are ostensibly a reversal of what was previously imposed on me, though the reality is that in such families, in structures that consume, the perfect housing never really existed. When you have been designated as the receptacle for the frustration, rage, and fear that is systemic, no pattern would ever suit your rooms. Every colour on the wheel would always be just off. A life spent trying to please becomes the chasing of a ghost of an idea, leaving one so completely occupied and filled with self-hatred that you did not realize no one cared to ask what color you would choose for your own walls. The beauty of being a house is that you can learn how to treat the rot by seeing what went wrong before. You can choose the curtains and the paint. You can construct it at your own pace. You can make shrines for the parts that can no longer hold the weight of the structure, but should never be forgotten. What happens when the body you inhabit begins to consume you? You can start to feed it what it has needed all along. Thank you so much for watching. It's time to go to our favourite place again. I'm going to turn myself into a house. How and why? These are valid questions that you have, my dear viewer. It's a cardboard playhouse for children. Hello! Nightmare fuel. Oh, I was not about to say a rude word. I was not. Did you hear that door open? I don't like that. Don't do that. Oh, I love when the scissors just glide through. Is there anything better? Is there anything better? Yes, I wear Crocs in the house, okay? They're very comfortable, even if they are very ugly. You trust me, right? You trust this face, this mad lady.